Joining me tonight are Geoff Hudson and Jon Dunster, both well known for their work with Class 50s. Good evening, gentlemen.
Evening, Joe.
Good to see you both.
Hi, Geoff.
Now, I hope that everybody heard the introduction, and I assume that because you've responded, everybody did, so that's brilliant. Okay, so what I'd like to do first is to ask you both to summarise your railway careers to date. Geoff, from joining BR to arriving at Laira, how did you get to be posted to the Plymouth depot in the 1980s, and just what did you find when you got there?
Well, the short answer is down to Intercity. I joined BR in 1973 as a trainee. After a period of training, my first appointment was at Landor Depot in Swansea, where as a technical officer I was responsible for looking after 47 4s that were working Paddington Swansea services. But that coincided with the startup of HSTs in 1976. And I shortly moved to the Eastern region, ready for the startup of HST services on the Eastern. And following a succession of appointments, I ended up as the HST power car engineer for the Eastern region at York. And by that time, I was closely aligned with Intercity. And as sectorisation started to take place, the regions diminished and gradually disappeared, and the depots became aligned with various sectors. And I was selected to work on the Intercity depots and was appointed then in 1989 as Area Fleet Manager at Laira. Now, most of you think of Laira in terms of Class 50s. The reality is Laira is actually the biggest high-speed train depot in the country that used to maintain, until recently, 2/3 of the national fleet. But when I arrived at Laira, it was a mishmash of everything. We had 5 customers from Great Western, Cross Country, Network South East, obviously for the 50s, and Waterloo Exeter, rail freight distribution for China Clay, and regional railways for the DMU services. So we had a busy time in those days trying to juggle all the different aspects. And gradually, as they disappeared, we became a bigger and bigger high-speed train depot.
Fabulous. Jonathan, how did you get involved with the 50 Fund and the Alliance?
Well, that's quite a convoluted story, Joe, but I'll try and keep it reasonably succinct. So I grew up just outside Exeter, and I became sort of quite interested and followed the Class 50 really from late 1970s, 1979, and it was, I suppose, inevitable that I was going to look for a career on the railway, and that came to fruition in late 1986, and I joined British Rail as a clerical officer in the Telephone Inquiry Bureau at Paddington. I was very fortunate in the first 4 years of my career really to be getting paid for, you know, seeing and travelling behind Class 50s almost every day. And in my second or third appointment after starting, I became a duty clerk in the SMO at Paddington, and was intimately involved with the operation of the class until they finished on the Thames and Chiltern duties in May of 1990. And a lot of the people that I became close to, who followed the Class 50s round, obviously Dave Keogh being one of them, were aware that I think from late 1980s, Geoff referred earlier on to the fact that sectorisation was beginning to take hold in the way that British Rail was organised. And it became very clear, actually, that these locomotives were not going to last as long as some people probably still assumed, because although they'd been refurbished quite recently, clearly the traffic that they were working was in decline, and it was pretty obvious that something needed to be done to save one for preservation. And the rest, you might say, is history, Joe, but I walked into a building society with Dave, I think in September 1988, and opened a bank account with 25 quid. Dave, ever being the persuasive type, it was my £25 to open the account and not his. And we started down this road of encouraging people to join us, and obviously we're still encouraging people to join us, and I'm sure we will talk through some of those episodes later tonight. And my career then took me through various operations roles, flitting really between Paddington and Euston. And in 1994, just after the sort of breakup of British Rail towards privatisation, I moved to Birmingham as a power controller for Intercity Cross Country. And that was one of the franchises that became part of Virgin Trains, and I enjoyed a sort of 22-year career with Virgin Trains on the Cross Country and West Coast until until it was taken over last December by First in Trenitalia, and I'm currently the Operations and Safety Director for First West Coast, so Avanti West Coast. So 34 years on, and you know, can't get away from railways one way or the other, Joe, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, there we go. So, Geoff, I have the first question from our public. This is asked by John Gautry. During the BR service, what was your most satisfying moment, and what was your most outrageous moment?
In terms of with Class 50s, it's difficult to choose really the most satisfying, but the one I've picked is the Carlisle 50 Farewell Rail Tour back in '92. It was the first run with 50007 since we'd restored it. The reason that was momentous was that we came storming up the Loom Gorge and over Shap, and we pulled into Carlisle, and I've never seen so many people on the platform waiting to greet us. It was just absolutely astounding that we've had all these people there to come and look at a diesel-hauled rail tour. And we thought, my God, when that had happened, we touched a nerve there. And that set the bar, I guess, for what we did subsequently, because we realised that there was a demand and we had to meet that demand, and people had an expectation. Of course, there was then the Midland Scots Rail Tour and returning 250s in blue livery. And finally, the Terminator, where, thank God, after 2 years, we managed to get them all through all those rail tours without actually breaking down once. So, but the Farewell 50 rail tour to Carlisle probably made me realise just what it was all about. And the most outrageous, well, that would be the summer of 1974. As a young trainee, I was at Bath Road learning to load bank 50s, and we managed to set the Bath Road load bank on fire with a 50 on top of it, and there were flames coming out everywhere. We had to manage to shut the engine down, put the fire out, and as traditional at the time, say nothing, pretend nothing had happened, and sorted it out.
Geoff, I have a question here from Ian Horner, and I will try and read it very carefully because I think there's a lot in this. Geoff, could you give us an insight into the relationship you and your team held with Network South East, particularly in the latter years? How did the commercial funding arrangements, albeit internal BR, work?
The relationship with Network South East was an extremely good one. There's a couple of things that most of you probably don't know about. One is, at that time, Chris Green was the director of Network South East, and Peter Field was the divisional director for the Network South East Southwest, in other words, where Waterloo Exeter ran. Both of them turned out to be very supportive of Class 50 operation. Chris Green was quite a fan of Class 50s, actually. So they were very supportive. But in terms of the day-to-day running, basically, we had a budget which we agreed each year with Network. In other words, Network would specify how many locomotives were to be maintained for the year. We create a budget, and we would, from that budget, we would then have to manage it. So the decisions about what was happening were down to me. But in terms of the maintenance regime, we had a fixed maintenance regime. The hard bit is all the unplanned failures, particularly when, as Joe Gus has mentioned, it's difficult with power unit changes, power unit failures, main generator failures that are unpredictable. How you budget for that is an absolute nightmare. But we had to do our best with that. And I think the truth of the matter is that we all worked as a team. There was a very good relationship. And of course, our sister depot was at Old Oak Common at the other end of the line, effectively. So between us, we were working as a team.
Another question to the pair of you, and again from Jez Oakley, who asks, in your opinion, which holds the largest responsibility for the ultimate demise of the Class 50s? Was it sectorisation or sprinterisation? John, would you like to take this one first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was working at Paddington when sectorisation came in early 1987, and initially Joe, sectorisation didn't really have any detrimental effect on the 50s. I mean, other than 5011, which had already been withdrawn by then and obviously gone to Crewe to assist with the cost-effective maintenance programme that Geoff talked about earlier, the other 49 locos were all allocated to various other sectors. So, you know, Network South East, regional, and of course parcels. But in my view, the loss of the newspaper traffic to road, you know, after the Wapping dispute, and then, you know, the rundown in the parcels service, and effectively the general reduction of locomotive haul trains of all descriptions, you know, is ultimately what caused the end here. And you know, don't forget that, you know, many other classes had gradually been withdrawn in the years, you know, leading up to the sort of the beginning of the rundown of the 50 fleet. And you know, the sort of 23-metre sprinters, what the 156s and the L3, the 158s, took over a lot of the regional services, you know, that previously the 50s had worked. As I've said, you know, a lot of the parcels trains and newspaper trains disappeared, leaving by that point only the Network South East services, which Geoff referred to. So it was inevitable, really, that the decline of local haul trains was the end for the 50s.
Okay, Geoff, what's your take?
Yeah, I would agree with what Gus was saying there. The reason for the demise really was down to the Class 158s. When the first 158 units were introduced, they were introduced to ScotRail, and that resulted in a cascade of the 47-7 fleet. And gradually, sprinters spread everywhere. And of course, as we know, the Waterloo Exeter were the last batch of 158s, which were upgraded to be called 159s, which took over the 50s. So the ultimate demise was partly sprinterisation and the result of sprinters taking over a lot of the work. But the other thing was that frontline intercity loco haul services were replaced by HST. And HST was probably the death knell of the 50. The 50 couldn't compete. We'd come up with this concept of a locomotive at each end of a train with the HST, and it was very successful. And that really the two things that finished it off were sprinters and HSTs.
Okay, well, this brings me on to a question which came about in conversation on a 50 fund, Class 50 Alliance volunteer event. We were set some quiz questions by Geoff, and one of the questions was which loco was fitted with an experimental headlight, and the answer was 5014. So the question I've got, Geoff, because none of us knew anything about it, and Mr. Middleton particularly questioned this, so here's a chance to get a question for Tony. 5014 is fitted with an experimental headlight for a period. Can you explain the reasons for the trial and why wasn't it rolled out across the rest of the class?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for this one, Tony. We've had to do quite a lot of digging to get the answer for you. It was fitted with a fibre optic headlight at refurbishment, and 5014 was the last 50 to be refurbished. Came out in 1983, if I remember rightly. And this was a fibre optic headlight which had a high power and a wider beam. And it was not pursued any further simply on the grounds of cost. It was too expensive. But we were trying to find out why this headlight was fitted. And we think the answer is to do with a request from Salisbury drivers. You see, Waterloo Exeter, a lot of it's single track, and particularly west of Salisbury, in darkness, it could be quite difficult to see where you're going. And the Salisbury drivers were requesting a better illumination. And we began to think this might also be that they're trying to see both the right and the left-hand side, because, of course, the headlights are effectively set to be like a dip light in a car, so you don't blind somebody coming the other way. But on the single track, you may well want to see the right-hand side and the left-hand side, particularly in some of the rural areas, and like around Seaton Junction, for example. And we think this headlight was fitted as a trial for running on single line. but it was fitted right at the end on the very last refurbished loco, and it wasn't pursued on the grounds of cost. Knowing Tony that it was your interest, I thought, well, best thing I can do is speak to a driver that actually drove the damn thing. So I've spoken with John Morton this evening to see if he can recall, and he's also LDC rep for drivers. He says he can recall it, but he can't recall any of the drivers requesting specifically to have this thing fitted. So we can't actually confirm it, but we suspect it's to do with operation on single track in rural areas. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. So another question for you, Jonathan, and this one from William Graham. The Class 50 preservation is a labour of love. In the case of the Fund Alliance, a labour of very many hands. Is there anything the organisation doesn't do yet, but in your opinion will need to do to secure the long-term future?
Right. Well, that's a pretty good question, Joe. Yeah. So I think, I mean, the first thing I'll say is to be successful in this arena, you have to apply yourself to an awful lot of different disciplines, really. So the obvious one that people see is, you know, the significant engineering, you know, skills required to maintain these locomotives. You know, they are quite complicated. What you do, you know, to maintain them requires heavy engineering, and it requires, you know, not just boundless enthusiasm, but it does need that, of course, but it does need the right level of skills and equipment and knowledge and spares, obviously, and it therefore needs, you know, many volunteers, and we are very, very fortunate that we have many volunteers. But we have many volunteers that do engineering, but we have many volunteers who apply their skills behind the scenes to a myriad of other things that really contributes to the success of what we do. And you know, I was flattered to hear that question earlier on, people saying about, you know, this enterprise being effectively, you know, the most successful in its sector, if you like. You know, that might be the case, but I don't think either you or I or anybody else involved, you know, come at it from that motivation. We come at it to do the very best we can to keep these locos, you know, running for the benefit of future generations to enjoy, and goodness may they are certainly enjoying them. But bringing things down to sort of sober reality, we have to accept the fact that these locos are now 52 years old. They weren't designed, you know, for a lifespan of more than about 22, 23 years. And the duty cycle that we operate them in is very, very different to, you know, how they were operated when Geoff was maintaining them. Now, some of that is good because they're not doing anywhere near the mileage or the accumulated hours that they were doing when they were in regular use. But infrequent use is not great for something that was really designed to be used continuously either. So I do think there are sort of three key areas that we have got to apply ourselves to going forward to ensure these locomotives remain viable to operate. So on the reliability front, first of all, I mean, as you know, we've got several things, you know, in the offing to modify the locos. And I think when I look back, before I go into the detail on those, when I look back, some people said to us when we first bought them, well, you must never modify them. You've got to keep them exactly original as they were when you received them from British Rail. Well, if we'd have done that, none of them would be operational now. So we have to be very realistic about this. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about paint schemes or control systems. There are modifications that are absolutely necessary. And if we'd have not done those, as I say, it's highly likely that some of these locos would have fallen by the wayside. But, you know, from a reliability point of view, electronic automatic voltage regulators, we're nearly through, you know, fitting the entire fleet with those. And, you know, the carbon power voltage regulators, as we all know, were a single point of failure, and the skills are not really there out in the marketplace now to overhaul those things. So what would we have done? You know, continue to try and repair something that is obsolete or replace it. So we've replaced it. Class 50s were built with only hand engine lube oil priming. Goodness knows why, because no other electric loco was so fitted. But you know, whilst we all like the exercise, Joe, really, you know, priming a locomotive by hand when it's not been used for months is not really, you know, viable for the long-term, you know, benefit of the engine. So, you know, electric lube oil priming, as you know, that's something we're, you know, seriously looking at the moment, and we'll have to do. And probably more important than anything else, for a number of reasons, but particularly from the wear and tear point of view, preheating of the engine prior to start is an absolute must. And we've got 2 variations of that to fit, but we have to fit it because we've got to prolong the life of these engines as long as we possibly can. Obsolescence is another issue. These locomotives were very cutting edge in terms of the technology that they incorporated when they were new. But a lot of these whiz-bang printed circuit boards, which I see you pouring over on a regular basis, Joe, I mean, frankly, they are obsolete now, aren't they? And
Yes.
we did about 20 years ago have a load of new ones made, but you can't do that anymore, and neither would you want to, because the kit is obsolete and it's unreliable. And so, the KV10 control units, the speedo control cards, the Radfan control system, all these other things, which I know you and other electrical wizards are pouring over. If we keep them as they are, the locomotives will become intolerably unreliable, and we can't afford to have that, particularly not with obviously 3 of them being registered to go out on the main line. And one failure on the main line these days is one too many. We just cannot have that level of risk. And then, from a more strategic point of view, we need to think about are we really going to get into the game of manufacturing of seriously large components? So wheel sets, for example, we don't have a full set of spare wheel sets. We probably have 1 spare wheel set, I think, for six locomotives. Well, that's not a sustainable position going forward. We have 3 locomotives that are on pretty good bogies. 5049, of course, we had a complete bogie overhaul done on, and 50007 for obvious reasons, and 5044 for less well-known reasons are on pretty substantially good bogies. But the other 3 locos are not. And so we've now got to face into, do we get these wheel sets overhauled, or do we actually look into getting some new ones manufactured? And as you're aware, we're looking at both of those options at the moment. None of them will be will be cheap, but they will be essential to keeping these locos on the road in the long term. And commercially, and I hate to use the word commercially in what is a volunteer enterprise, but these are expensive locomotives to maintain. They are expensive. We cannot subsist on the fees that we receive from the Severn Valley Railway, for example. We normally, obviously not at the moment, but we normally enjoy some very good commercial returns from the Severn Valley Railway every year, and all credit to them for supporting us in that way. But as you're well aware, we cannot effectively pay the running costs of these locomotives solely on that income stream. So running the locos on the main line is being done for a number of reasons. Yes, because it gets the locos out there, and it is very, very gratifying to see them do what they were designed to do. A pair of 50s at full chat is a sight to behold. I think all of us on this call would testify to that. It gives me goosebumps every time. But and I say that 30 years in, it's never something you take for granted. And I think in the current lockdown situation, we'll take it even less for granted when we can do it again. But we do need to think carefully about how we commercially manage these locos. And I mentioned earlier on, the relationship we have with some of the mainline operators, notably GB Rail Freight. They will be key to our continued success. There's no doubt about it. So, the heritage railway sector is always important, because it allows our volunteers and our shareholders and members to see the locomotives in close quarters in a safe environment. But we need to do other things as well in order to make them, justifiable to continue operating. But I think the last thing I would summarise by saying, Joe, is that we have been tremendously fortunate over the last 30 years. We've been very fortunate because the combination of skills of all the people involved in this group is the best in the business. There is absolutely no doubt about that. So I will indulge in a little bit of self praise for a moment, because I think people on the call should reflect on their collective achievements. This group has achieved more than any other in the sector, and that is a sum of all the parts. Some of those parts are very visible in public, and some of those parts are very much behind the scenes. And if I think about some of the things that have been done behind the scenes this year by the likes of John Tiley and David Clough and other people that look after the administration of the group, they work wonders, as much as the engineering team, led by Tony and James and yourself and others, all work wonders on a regular basis. But it is the sum of the parts, and I think the unanimity of purpose as well is the other thing, because a lot of these sorts of groups are riven over the years with fallouts and political issues and infighting, all this type of stuff, and we have managed not to have any of that. And everybody ultimately shares the same goal, and that is to see these things doing what they were designed to do and to maintain them in the best possible condition. And they are in the best possible condition. And that's testament to everybody who supported us. And I cannot thank them enough. You know, whether they've been with us for 30 years or 30 minutes, you know, the support we get is just without parallel, and it's really appreciated.
Well, thank you for all your kind words there, John. And I entirely agree with you that without everybody, we would not be where we are now. And that sort of brings us to the end. There's one thing I would like to say, and that is that the Severn Valley Railway is at the moment under some financial stress. It's got a number of things that it's trying to do. It has furloughed, as many heritage operations have, quite a few of its staff. One of the things that we've managed to do is to put up one of the locos we've currently got care of, and that's 50033 as a sponsorship asset. I would really recommend that if you want to get involved and put some money the way of the Severn Valley Railway, please sponsor 5033. There is an opportunity to win something quite special off the back of it. So no more detail, but please, if you've got some money, please have a look at that as well as supporting us directly. That's it for this evening. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and we hope you've enjoyed it and learnt something along the way. Certainly I've learnt a few things about Class 50 history that I didn't really know before. I'd like to thank our experts, John and Geoff, and also Richard for his technical wizardry, holding the whole thing together and getting the broadcast out there. I do have a very small number of questions left over, which we will hold over for a future show. This seems to have been very successful, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. We will have a look at how we might do something similar again in perhaps a month or so, or a few weeks. So if you'd like to see it happen again, please could you leave us some positive feedback on the Facebook group. We'd like to do that. We hope that this program has been recorded. We've tried to record it anyway. If it's a success, we will try and make that available to you as well. Exactly how, I'm not sure. But again, that's something that we will try and resolve. So yes, please do give us your support. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you all very much for taking part and for your questions. Please keep them coming in, because if we do it again, let's have a really good pool of questions that we can put forward. So that's it for now. Thank you all. I wish you all good night.